And then we had a hearing on Monday, and we went to court and we explained to the judge what was going on and how this was all working. And fortunately, the judge was fair and he was kind and he was sympathetic, and he said, you know what? No, you can't stop their sale. Keep it going.
October 7th, 2025. U.S. Marshals arrive at Heavy D's Utah shop, and the empire behind Diesel Brothers suddenly faces its biggest crisis. According to reports, Dave Sparks was caught in a legal disaster that grew into roughly $13 million in lawsuits and penalties. Within months, his wife filed for divorce, rumors of a split with Diesel Dave exploded, and the Brotherhood fans admired seemed to collapse. How did two TV stars end up facing federal court, jail, and divorce in just 5 months? The garage that built an empire. Two guys named Dave walked into a church singles event in Utah looking for nothing more than ordinary conversation, maybe a few new friends, and walked out having unknowingly rewritten their entire future. Dave Sparks, the one the world would later call Heavy D, had already dropped out of Weber State after just 1 semester, according to his biography on Wikipedia, choosing instead to chase something that made far more sense to him than classrooms ever did: diesel engines, torque, and the kind of mechanical chaos most people would walk away from. Across the room that night was Dave Kiley, Diesel Dave, a guy who didn't just like trucks, he lived and breathed them. And when they started talking, it wasn't small talk, it was instant recognition. Same obsession, same energy, same refusal to treat vehicles like anything less than machines that could be pushed to the absolute edge. Here's the thing, that kind of connection doesn't fade easily. It compounds. Not long after that meeting, they opened a small repair shop in Woods Cross, Utah. Nothing glamorous. No investors. No cameras. Just two Daves, grease under their fingernails, building and fixing diesel trucks late into the night. The kind of place where ideas were tested immediately, not pitched in meetings. And somewhere in those early days, they started filming what they were doing. At first, it was simple YouTube uploads, wild builds, louder-than-life stunts, trucks doing things they were absolutely not supposed to do. But people watched. Then, more people watched. According to Dave Sparks' Wikipedia biography, that garage hustle eventually turned into something far bigger, a media machine that caught the attention of the Discovery Channel. By January 2016, Diesel Brothers had officially hit television screens, and what started as a local Utah garage project was now being broadcast to millions. Suddenly, these two mechanics weren't just building trucks, they were building a brand. And get this, it didn't just run for a season or two. The show lasted 7 seasons, as documented in entertainment reporting on its broadcast history, and during that time, the Diesel Brothers became household names. Kids recognized the trucks. Adults quoted the builds. The chemistry between Heavy D and Diesel Dave looked effortless, like they were born into the same storyline and just happened to be filmed doing it. But think about that for a second. When something looks that smooth from the outside, what's actually holding it together on the inside? Because while the world saw two friends living a dream in sync, success was quietly adding weight to everything they touched. Bigger builds, bigger money, bigger attention. And with that came pressure that no garage in Woods Cross could have prepared them for. You could feel it even in the early rise, that sense that this wasn't just two guys playing with trucks anymore, it was becoming something massive, something with consequences. So what changes when a small Utah garage friendship turns into a national television empire? And the same success that made them famous starts putting them on a collision course with forces neither of them fully understood? The Clean Air Act lawsuit that didn't go away. It wasn't a rival mechanic or a business deal gone wrong that first brought federal attention to Heavy D's world. It was doctors in Utah watching a TV show and realizing they were seeing something that didn't just look reckless. It looked illegal in real time. The lawsuit landed in 2017, filed by Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, a group of medical professionals focused on air quality and public health impacts across the state. According to court filings reported by Ground News coverage of the case, they allege that Dave Sparks, known as Heavy D, and his team were modifying diesel trucks in ways that disabled emission systems, a practice commonly associated with rolling coal, where trucks are tuned to release heavy black exhaust for effect. For the doctors, this wasn't entertainment. It was pollution they believed was being deliberately produced and broadcast to millions. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Their own TV show became part of the evidence. Think about that for a second. Every exaggerated rev, every plume of black smoke, every look what this thing can do moment captured on camera wasn't just content anymore. It was documentation. According to the same reporting and filings referenced in public court summaries, footage from Diesel Brothers was used to support claims that emissions controls were being bypassed or disabled during builds featured on the show. By 2018, a federal injunction had already escalated things. A U.S. District Court order restricted further modifications that violated the Clean Air Act, a federal law enforced by the Environmental Protection Agency governing vehicle emission standards. But the story didn't slow down there. Court records summarized on Wikipedia's entry for Dave Sparks note that despite the injunction, the operations tied to the show continued in ways that kept them inside legal fire again and again. And this is where success starts turning into pressure. Because by 2020, the financial consequences were no longer theoretical. The penalties reached $761,451 paid to the United States government and an additional $90,000 to Davis County, according to the same legal record summaries. Then, in 2021, legal fees added another $928,602 paid to Utah physicians for a healthy environment. On appeal, the court described the conduct in unusually direct language, calling it flagrant misconduct, a phrase that rarely shows up in routine regulatory disputes. Now pause there. Flagrant misconduct doesn't sound like a misunderstanding. It sounds like a pattern that kept going even after warnings. The original lawsuit had actually sought far more, up to $114 million, according to court reporting and case summaries. But even the reduced outcome was enough to mark a permanent shift. This wasn't just a disagreement over builds anymore. It was a federal environmental case with paper trails, broadcast footage, and court orders all pointing back to the same garage culture that made them famous. So here's the uncomfortable question that starts to form underneath all of this. When your entire brand is built on pushing machines to extremes, where exactly do you draw the line once the law steps in and says stop? The $11,800,000 trademark hit. It didn't come from a courtroom in Utah first. It came from a fashion brand in Italy that had nothing to do with diesel trucks and everything to do with a name they'd been using like it belonged to them. Diesel SPA, an Italian clothing company with a history stretching back over 50 years, had built its identity around a single word that meant something completely different in their world. According to litigation reporting summarized by Bloomberg Law, the issue wasn't trucks or emissions, it was branding. The Diesel Brothers merchandise line, Diesel Power Gear, was built on that same word, and for years it sat inside a growing empire of shirts, caps, and online sales tied directly to the television show's popularity. Now here's where it gets interesting. What looks like casual branding to viewers can become a legal trigger the moment ownership gets disputed. For Diesel SPA, this wasn't casual at all. They filed a trademark infringement case, arguing that the use of diesel in the merchandise brand was creating confusion and leveraging their established name in the fashion industry. According to court coverage reported by Bloomberg Law, the case escalated into something far bigger than a branding disagreement. It became a full federal trademark trial. By 2023, the court had made its decision. Diesel Brothers business entities were found liable for trademark infringement and ordered to pay $11,800,000 in damages to Diesel SPA. The original award request had been around $59 million, but the judge reduced it by roughly 80%, calling the initial figure excessive, as documented in the same legal reporting. But think about that number for a second. Even reduced, it didn't land softly. $11,800,000 wasn't just a fine. It was structural damage. And when you stack it with everything already happening in the background, the picture starts to shift fast. Environmental penalties had already crossed into the hundreds of thousands, with over $850,000 in earlier federal and county payments, and legal fees from the Utah physicians case pushing close to another $1 million, based on prior court records. Now add the trademark judgment on top, and media summaries began rounding the total legal exposure to roughly $13 million. Here's the thing, it stopped looking like isolated lawsuits and started looking like a pattern of collision after collision with the law. Because this wasn't just about emissions anymore, and it wasn't just about trucks. It was about intellectual property, brand control, and the legal ownership of a name they had turned into a commercial identity. And get this, the more successful the brand became, the more surface area it created for legal pressure to attach itself. You could feel the shift in how fragile the empire had become. Every revenue stream now had a shadow attached to it. Every product line carrying the weight of a courtroom decision waiting in the background. At this point, a viewer has to start wondering something uncomfortable. When a brand grows through television fame, merchandise, and viral builds, how much of that growth is actually protected? And how much of it was already on borrowed legal time? The liquidation, the arrest, the silence. The garage sale wasn't a celebration. It was a countdown disguised as an announcement. And by the time fans realized something was off, the machinery behind it was already moving faster than anyone could stop. October 2025 hits, and Heavy D is on camera talking through what looks like a massive restructuring of assets, millions of dollars in custom-built trucks, equipment, and shop inventory being put up for sale. According to video coverage of the announcement and subsequent reporting on the sale, fans initially treated it like a business pivot, just another expansion or reset from the Diesel Brothers brand. But inside legal circles, it looked very different. It looked like liquidation under pressure. Here's the thing, liquidation doesn't start when you want it to. It starts when someone else forces the timeline. Behind the scenes, a federal judge stepped in and halted parts of the garage sale mid-process, according to court-related video documentation and reporting tied to the proceedings. The concern wasn't just business slowdown, it was asset movement during active enforcement. And once that happens, everything tightens fast. Then, on October 7, 2025, U.S. Marshals in Salt Lake City arrested Heavy D for contempt of court, tied to failure to comply with financial penalties reportedly totaling $843,602.23, as referenced in court coverage and arrest reporting. And just like that, the same public figure who built his identity on control over machines and chaos is now being physically escorted under federal enforcement. And get this, the announcement right before all of this, the one that looked confident, almost upbeat, didn't age the way it was meant to. Viewers would later revisit it and notice something different, a kind of pressure under the surface, like someone trying to stay in control of a situation that had already slipped past a point of control. After the arrest, everything changes. Diesel Dave goes completely silent. No explanations, no joint appearances, no continuation of the public rhythm that once defined them. According to archived public statements and video timelines, the original Diesel Brothers show had already ended in 2023, not because of cancellation, but because both sides had agreed to step away from Discovery Channel production in favor of YouTube independence. That detail matters because it reframes everything. The split wasn't Heavy D versus Diesel Dave. The split had already happened earlier, quietly, structurally, in the decision to leave television behind. But the arrest is what made the silence permanent. Think about that for a second. Two guys who built their entire identity on being inseparable in public suddenly separated not by disagreement, but by courtrooms, enforcement, and disappearing communication. You could almost feel the shift in how the story stopped being about business and started being about consequences. And here's where it gets heavier. Fans had always assumed the end of the television era was just a creative move, a clean exit from network control. But when you line up the timing, the legal pressure, and the public silence, it starts to look less like a transition, and more like a collapse happening in stages. So what happens when the friendship that built a global brand doesn't end with betrayal, but with one man in federal custody and the other vanishing into silence? The divorce and what's left. 5 months after federal marshals took Heavy D into custody, the next collapse didn't happen in a courtroom or a boardroom. It happened quietly, inside a Utah courthouse filing that came on March 10, 2026. Ashley Sparks filed for divorce, according to TMZ reporting published the following day on March 11, 2026, and the timing alone said more than any public statement ever could. By that point, Heavy D had already gone through an arrest, ongoing legal pressure, and a shrinking sense of control over everything he had built. Now the personal structure around him was breaking too. And 5 months is not a long gap when you look at what happened inside it. One moment, federal marshals are enforcing court orders. The next, a marriage is legally dissolving. No long separation phase, no gradual public breakdown. Just pressure stacking fast enough that each event runs into the next. What makes it hit harder is how close these events sit together in the timeline. Not spread across years, not distant consequences, but one compressed stretch where everything starts giving way at once. But while Heavy D's world was collapsing inward, another version of his life had already started shifting direction. Before the arrest ever happened, he had moved into a completely different space. In February 2024, Heavy D acquired rights connected to the canceled Nikola Badger project after Nikola Corporation shut it down, according to reporting on the vehicle's development history. The Badger was originally designed as a hydrogen-electric pickup concept, and those rights later became part of his push into EMBBR Motors, a venture focused on hydrogen and electric vehicle development. And that contrast is hard to ignore. A man once known for diesel smoke and rolling coal is now trying to position himself inside clean energy branding. Same identity in public view, but pulling in a different direction behind the scenes. But direction doesn't always mean stability. Because while Heavy D was trying to reshape what came next, Diesel Dave stayed locked into the world they had built together. According to Monster Jam coverage and vehicle documentation, Dave Kiley continued driving the Brodozer into 2026, still powered by a Cat C13 engine, still performing in front of live audiences, still carrying the diesel performance identity that defined their rise. So now the picture splits completely. Two men who started in the same garage, on the same path, now living entirely different outcomes. One navigating legal fallout, financial pressure, and personal breakdown. The other continuing a version of the brand that once belonged to both of them, just without the shared center that made it what it was. And when you lay it all out, it stops feeling like separate incidents. It becomes a sequence of collisions, hitting the same foundation from different angles, legal pressure, financial strain, and finally, emotional collapse. So the question becomes uncomfortable in a different way now. When two people build an empire together, and only one walks out of the aftermath intact in any recognizable way, what does survival actually mean? The comeback plan. It's hard watching a man known for diesel smoke and rolling coal start talking about hydrogen systems and electric futures, like the whole identity just flipped while the collapse was still unfolding. But that shift didn't come out of nowhere. Before everything fell apart legally and personally, Heavy D had already stepped into the clean energy space. According to reporting on the Nikola Badger project's development history, he was involved in designing the Nikola Badger, a hydrogen fuel cell pickup announced with real industry attention. For a moment, it looked like diesel culture and future energy tech were about to meet in the middle. Then Nikola canceled the project in 2020, and the idea went quiet. Fast forward to February 2024, and the direction returns in a different form. Heavy D acquires rights tied to the canceled Nikola Badger concept and begins building EMBBR Motors, a venture focused on hydrogen and electric vehicles. The same man once known for coal rolling is now building around zero-emission systems. And that contrast is difficult to ignore. But while Heavy D tries to rebuild forward, Diesel Dave stays in the lane they originally built together. According to Monster Jam coverage and vehicle documentation, Dave Kiley continues driving the Brodozer into 2026, powered by a Cat C13 engine, still performing live and still tied to diesel performance culture. So the split becomes complete. One side moves into hydrogen and electric systems. The other stays rooted in diesel identity and live performance. And when you zoom out, the three collisions are already clear. Legal pressure, financial collapse, and personal breakdown didn't just damage the empire. They split it into different directions that no longer align. What makes it even more uncomfortable is the reversal at the center of it all. The man who became famous for pushing diesel extremes is now trying to build clean energy solutions. So is this a comeback story, or just survival in a completely different form? Everything really split in 2023. Diesel Brothers walked away from Discovery Channel by choice, not Heavy D versus Dave. So was it principle, survival, or pressure? Comment your answer, and let's get the conversation going.